How about this last question then? Last question, dude. Churches, man. Why are they so far behind in terms of reopening? I mean, just in case, I wonder if some of our listeners, this is relevant to a lot of our listeners. And as church leaders, I know there is a sort of tension that I've heard amongst pastors where it's like this tension between listening to the government, right? Submitting to the government, obviously being concerned with people's welfare, but also kind of wondering if maybe the government's being a little too strict, if that makes sense, in a way that's unfair. Could you speak into this a little bit? Why are churches maybe more high risk, and what's going on with that?
I think, part of the thinking behind churches is more about gathering size more than anything else, right? As well as kind of the activity that you're doing when you're in church. Church being, in a building, right? Not the biblical sense of the church, right? So if we're talking about Sunday service, then you have a lot of people packed into one space. And, for example, if you're singing, right? Singing or conversing, right? You're increasing the amount of exposure that people are getting. As an epidemiologist, it is, there was like one Superspreader event where it was like a choir practice. Where at the end of it, I think it was like 80+% got infected.
Wow.
Dang.
I think it was
dude.
Washington.
Whoever.
Yeah.
Man, that's a loud choir member, bro.
It was white people in Washington.
Oh, dang, dude. At least they're singing passionately.
They take it serious, bro. That's faith.
Yeah. So, like with that kind of thinking of, how much are you expiring, right? The different particles, and there's still a lot of unknowns around the particles, right? Like how big is it? Even cloth masks, right? Like how effective are those, right? There is mixed data on those. If it's a properly fitted N95 mask, then that's another question altogether. But, it's because there's so many questions, it's like, I would ask, what is the need to meet in such a large group? Like if you have small groups, I think that small groups naturally lend themselves to, a safer way to meet while still having church.
Just because there's less people?
Fewer people, you have fixed people, right? It's the same group of people.
Yeah.
You have, and generally you're meeting about a week apart. So if you have symptoms, right, then ideally you would feel them sometime pretty, you'd be aware of them sometime between meetings. So you're not going to the next meetings, while you're infectious.
So the fixed aspect is important too, to go back.
Yeah.
So you probably wouldn't recommend like mixing like constantly or something.
Yeah.
Like
so
someone
the
wanted
idea
to like
is
mix up small
limiting your
groups.
exposure, right? The fewer number of contacts you have, the less likely you are to get COVID, right? It's just limiting exposure.
Yeah, I guess so. Just, as there are churches that are going to be kind of reopening or whatever, I guess what general guidelines, if you could just kind of distill it down for those churches that are going to be reopening and meeting in person, what would be some good guidelines to give to those churches?
I think, my thoughts would be around minimizing the exposure, right? So tight, small enclosed spaces, right? Like how big is your sanctuary, right? Are you in a small packed room and you're packing it full? Or are you in, you have huge ceilings, or are you meeting outdoors, right? Like generally outdoor exposure, so far there's not much evidence of it, right? Most of the clusters that we're seeing are, family members, homes, workplaces, travel, like enclosed spaces. So if you're somewhere where you're able to have fresh air in between you, then all the better, right? And obviously distancing, limiting the number of people if possible. And then always, being very mindful of anyone who's at high risk, right? I think the numbers generally are around like 60 to 80% are mildly asymptomatic, right? But of that 20 to 40%, who get hospitalized, and, if you're on a ventilator, the case fatality rates once you're on a ventilator is pretty bad. But part of that is due to the fact that they wait till the last minute to put you on a ventilator, right? So, elderly, the whole list of comorbidities that they talk about, right? Like heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, obesity, these are all different ways that you can help limit severe, consequences for your church's big thing.
So the scriptures tell us to greet one another with a brotherly kiss. Yes or no?
Leave that up to you.